welcome. We finished a text on how to flow properly, how to have your soul flow through your mind so that you're governing your thinking, your speaking, and your actions. And now we want to talk about how it is that, especially now in the high holidays, how it is that we go through this process called tshuva, to reconnect to God, to get back up to our highest self, and to start the new year really from a place of holiness. You want to pass these around? Thanks, Eleanor. So this text, we're going to start with a few definitions.
You're going to have to pass. I can't get through it.
There you go. Welcome. We're going to start with a few definitions because just the word tshuva itself is a word that is really not possible to translate into English. And some of the other words too, kapara, mechila, that we're using in this section is also a little tricky. We'll all turn off our phones as well. We'll do that for mine too. No worries. So let's dive right in. Let's start with page 180, and we'll do the same reading. So Dan, if you want to start, and Linda will come to you afterwards. Tanya besof yoma shlosha chilukei chaparahim.
It has been taught in Baraita at the end of Tractate Yoma. There are three types of atonement, varying according to the different categories of transgression.
So here's the first word we're going to need to define, which is kapara, from Yom Kippur. So often it's translated as atonement. Like I said last week, I suggest that we take English and throw it really out the window. We're going to redefine kapara. And even though I like the word atonement for tshuva, as you'll see in a little bit why, none of them capture either the essence of what tshuva means or kapara means. And kapara, as you'll see, the root is from cleansing or scouring or wiping away. So kapara has something to do with something being cleaned off, being wiped away. And there's three types of it. Tshuva im kol echad. Go ahead, Eleanor.
And repentance necessarily accompanies each of them.
So, and tshuva, now the second word, has to come with each of them, has to come before them. And tshuva, we're going to define as really, this is a little better known. Tshuva means return. Lashuv, tashuv. So that root, shav, means to return, right? It means to return. And so we're returning to something, and it has to do with the mystical side that we looked at last week, where we were returning the hay, as we saw, but also us returning to our highest selves, us returning to our connection with God, and us returning to our innocent state where we are our true identity, and we're not this superficial cover that we sometimes create during the year with our mistakes. And now we get into a little bit of halacha, and we'll go into this, and then I'm going to go to a slideshow. Avar mitzvah aseh v'shav eino zav misham ad shemochalin lo. Go ahead.
If one failed to fulfill a positive commandment and repented, he is forgiven forthwith.
So if I should have done something positive, right? So I wake up, and in my practice, I wake up, I say the Shema at some point in the morning, right? So if that morning I was rushed, I didn't say the Shema, now I've failed to fulfill a positive commandment. Or if I was supposed to eat matzah on Pesach, and there was no matzah, I didn't get to it, right? Pesach passes, I haven't eaten matzah. That was something I was meant to do by Judaism, and I failed to do it. Make sense? That's failing to fulfill a positive commandment. What happens? Once I actually do tshuva, once I apologize and say, I'm sorry, I'm forgiven right away, right there. It's done. It's done. Make sense?
Does it matter what kind of positive commandment?
Apparently not. It says a positive commandment of any kind, learning Torah, going into a sukkah, any positive commandment, right? So apparently the whole category, if I fail to do it, as soon as I do tshuva, I'm forgiven right there and then. It's done.
You mean as soon as you realize and then kind of apologize,
As soon as you actually apologize,
okay.
Stuart.
like verbally or?
Well, to God. So we define tshuva, and let's go through the basics of tshuva. Last week we said the essence of tshuva is to apologize for the sin, decide you're never going to do it again, right? So earnestly decide, I'm never going to make that mistake again. That's my intention for good now. And I'm sorry, and I'm returning to God, and I'm not going to rebel in that sense, right? So when I've earnestly done that, and I said that to God, that's tshuva. Now, in real time, some of the sins are not just against God. So if I sin against a person, this is something, although most of us know, I don't know a lot of people that actually take this practice seriously, and I highly recommend it, that if I've done something where I've hurt a person through an avera, right? I've hurt a person by getting angry, I've stolen something from them, I struck them, I whatever it might be, I told a story about them. If I've harmed somebody, now I do have to approach that person and apologize before I can do tshuva with God, right? So I do recommend at this time that we go over our past year, that we think of all our relationships, we think of anyone that we have an outstanding debt, so to speak, where we've hurt them, harmed them, treated them improperly, and really make amends and approach them. I know some people feel like this is somehow childish and it feels silly to go and apologize to somebody for something that happened 8 months ago or 2 days ago, but it's the furthest thing from childish. We're fooling ourselves into thinking that that's something that adults have mastered and are beyond. It's really quite difficult and quite productive and healing for relationships. And by the way, none of the tshuva that we're talking about can happen until we've done it. So that really is essential. I recommend people think through, and anything really outstanding, go and approach the person, make amends.
Would this apply only to Jewish people or anybody?
Anybody. Every creation is, universally important and is required. And I should only interact with everything in the world in a appropriate way, especially a human being. Yeah. And by the way, now maybe they'll accept it the first time. Good, then we're good. Thanks. If they don't, I'm required to try a second time. If they don't accept that, I'm required to try a third time. After that, I'm not required to become an endless nudge. It's up to them whether or not they're going to accept. And by the way, for us, when someone comes and apologizes to us, it is our obligation to accept their apology. Right? It says, even if someone cut off your hand and they come and they apologize, you need to accept their apology. So you can imagine. So for all the other things that we run through in our minds of like, how could I forgive for this or that? It's probably easier than someone cutting off your hand. So in fact, there's a part of the bedtime Shema that just says, I forgive everyone for everything in any lifetime, whatever they've done, which covers it as a blanket that I say. So anyone out there that feels they need to apologize for anything, I've already forgiven you. You're forgiven. We're good. I do it every night of the bedtime Shema. I might miss it a few nights, but and some people feel like if you say that, that's fine. That the other person's saying it, so I don't need to apologize to them. But I don't go by that. I believe if I did something, I should step up and apologize. It's just an important step.
And if by any chance you happen to see a loose hand around, return it.
If you find someone's hand, definitely bring it back. We especially if it's within the first few minutes. God forbid. So now let's go into assuming that I have apologized to the people, and now I'm okay to approach God, because that's generally for the negative commandments, right? That I've done something negative to someone. Now let's go to a few definitions. So let me share my screen, because we need to understand these words if we're going to really benefit from this. Oh, that's a whiteboard. Share screen. All right, let's not. I see what's going on. Share screen, slideshow. And now you're seeing this online, right, Linda? You see Igeris Tshuva?
Yes.
Great. So this is Igeris Tshuva, called Letter on Repentance is the definition of the, is the translation. We're looking at chapters 1 through 3 today. It's a big section, which is looking at the technical aspects of tshuva. We're not going to cover all the details, as if you read it at home, there's a long section about fasting, which I'll ask you to just store for the moment, but don't fast for 30 days or 50 days. There's different ways, as you'll see later on, and we're not going to focus on that. There's different ways to achieve the same thing. This class is called Accentuate the Positive. Accentuate the Positive. We're talking about how to do tshuva for a positive commandment, how to do tshuva for a negative commandment, and how they differ. And by understanding the dynamics of what they are, we're going to understand some deep, deep practices about tshuva. So our first definition is tshuva, which we said is return. Return. So tshuva is not, I'm a bad person, and now I'm going to approach God. God's forgiven me, and now God's forgiven me for who I am, being a bad person. Now God, even though I don't deserve it, has brought me back close to God, me a bad person. Tshuva is that entire time, everything negative that I ever did was not the real me. That was a mask, a put on, a shell. And maybe that shell gets more and more established, and I think it's me. And eventually I maybe even forget who I really am, my soul, which is a piece of God. But when I do tshuva, it's not me being forgiven for who I am. It's me returning to who I am. It's me returning to who I am. And all that stuff that I did, that was just a shell, that was just facade, that was a front. And when I get rid of it, when I wash it off, now I'm back to who I am. I'm returning to who I am. So we should know that very definitionally about Judaism, because we live in a wider society which has a lot of Christian ideas about sin, and we're not inherently sinful, we're inherently godly. So when we do tshuva, we're not being forgiven for who we are, as in I am a sinner. We're just returning to who we are, which is I am a piece of God, an actual piece of God. And the stuff that had to come off, that was just an external phenomenon. Make sense? And we learned spiritually, we'll go into a little more, that also there's a level where when we do tshuva, we return the hey to God's 4-letter name, right? I won't go through the whole thing now, but when I return to myself, I actually have the capacity to affect the integrity of God's name. I have the capacity to reunite God's name. That creates tremendous light that comes down. So we should really know, and the take home from this class is, I'm not just doing this for myself, so I feel good at Rosh Hashanah, I have a fresh start. I'm doing this because that light that I bring into the world, that's my contribution. And doing tshuva is actually bringing new light into the world from a very high place, even higher than if I hadn't done the mistakes that led to the tshuva. So we'll see at the end of the class today that the whole attitude towards an avera, a sin, and what it is different than what you might have in your mind. And then in the end, the focus is all on the positive. Even a mistake, even an avera, in the end is going to turn into a positive or bring light and create even a higher connection with God than I would have had without it.
So when we don't do a positive or we do a negative, the last hey in God's name is separated. Is that right?
I won't go that far. Yeah, it's the negatives that mostly do it. Not doing the positives, I think, has, as you'll see, less of a destructive effect, but there's a different effect we'll get into. It's the averas that mainly do that. The averas that can disconnect that hey.
The last hey from God's name.
Yeah, the negative commandments. Second definition, kapara. Kapara. Here, there's not so much confusion about what it means as just we haven't really thought about it, right? Yom Kippur, we say means Day of Atonement, and what's the root? What is it? Kapara comes from an Aramaic word, according to Rashi, and I know there's a lot of arguments about this, and people agree and disagree, and all the sources that come down. But the Alter Rebbe goes by Rashi, which is a great source, and Rashi says this word is from the Aramaic, as in Kippurei Zahav, which were the silver wash basins that they used in the temple to wash their hands, that the Kohen would wash with their hands. So the root of kapara has to do with washing off, cleansing, right? My hands are full of dirt and whatever from the world. And then I put them in these wash basins and I wash them off and I come out and now my hands are just my hands, clean. There's nothing else on them from something outside, right? So it has the idea of washing away, and this has to do with our soul. Like I said, our soul is actually a piece of God. That can be concealed, but it can't be changed. So if we want to do tshuva and return to being consciously an actual spark of God, an actual piece of God, then we have to wash away the superficial shell that has maybe formed over the year, and that's the process of kapara. There's a few ways of doing it, 3, as he said. Does that make sense? So who can define tshuva? Tshuva means what?
Return,
Return.
cleanse,
And kapara means
cleanse.
cleansing. Right. Right. And then the third one that he uses in this page, although it's not that common, is mechila. Mechila, which means forgiveness. That really is like the human phenomenon of forgiveness, that there's a distance, there's a barrier because something's happened. Now they've made an appropriate overture, and now I'm reestablishing the relationship. I'm forgiving. The only difference is we should be aware that my ability of forgiveness is limited. God's ability of forgiveness is absolutely unlimited. So any limitation that I naturally place on forgiveness based on my experience and my capacity, it's very important that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we consciously put that aside. Because among the things that we don't want to anthropomorphize about God is the capacity for forgiveness. And we often think of God as a being like us, but just bigger and stronger and smarter. That's obviously a mistake. We only use that language so we can relate to God, but God is infinitely removed from us. And that includes God's capacity for mechila, for forgiveness. So whereas if somebody really did something terrible to me, how could I forgive them for, you name it? If somebody did something to me 100 times and they did 101 times, and they come and say, I'm so sorry, I'm going to say, are you kidding me? They're just going to keep doing it. This is a pattern. I can't forgive them. It's going to be harder, at least, to forgive them. None of that applies to God. None of that applies to God. We should know that every time we apologize to God, it's imagine a 2-year-old grandchild apologizing for some minor thing they did for the first time to their grandparents with tears in their eyes. I'm sorry, grandma, that I blah, 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 blah. What grandparent is not going to say, come here, I of course I forgive you, and show them what real forgiveness feels like and take them and hold them, and right? And that doesn't even get close to God's capacity for forgiveness. That's just maybe the easiest example we can think of easy, simple forgiveness. For God, it's infinitely beyond that. And as an aside, that's why we actually pray that God should forgive us every day. We ask God for forgiveness in the Amidah. And then we say, blessed is God who grants forgiveness. And you're not allowed to say a blessing like that unless it's happened. That's a blessing in vain. It's a serious halakhic issue. So we could not have put that blessing in the Amidah if we weren't 100% sure that God had just forgiven us. It would have been halakhically so beyond the pale. Like people are very, very careful to not say blessings just casually, right? And we say this every day, repeatedly, every day. We say, blessed is God who has forgiven me, who forgives, right? So this is something we really need to understand, that come Yom Kippur, when we ask for forgiveness, it's happened no matter what, as long as we've apologized to the people involved. Make sense? So that is one. Tshuva is what? Return. 2, kapara is what? Cleansing. And 3, mechila is what? Okay, so now we're going to go into these positive and negative commandments. I've moved, so I can't see that. Oh, I've got a clock here. These positive and negative commandments, what is the difference in terms of how kapara, cleansing, can happen, right? The point of Yom Kippur is for this stuff to just get washed off of us, so we're back to who we really are, peace of God. Now, the difference between a positive and a negative commandment is, we'll see there's an interesting seeming conundrum that's going to show up. Now, if we violate a negative commandment, avar al mitzvah lo taseh v'shav, tshuva tola v'yom hakippurim mechaper. Go ahead, Doreen, if one violated.
If one failed to fulfill a positive commandment and repented, he is forgiven forthwith.
And one more. Go ahead, one more.
If one violated a prohibitive commandment and repented, his repentance is tentative,
Ooh.
and Yom Kippur atones.
Ah, okay. So we know God forbid, I like to put on tefillin every day, right? It's a wonderful thing and it focuses my mind. It's a commandment. I put them on every morning. One morning I wake up, I don't put them on in time. I don't put them on at all. Who knows what happened, right? Okay, later on, there's no person involved. I didn't harm anybody. This is between me and God. I say to God, I'm so sorry. I love my tefillin. I'm going to put them on every day. That's my intention. I'm sorry. Boom. I'm standing there and I'm forgiven as soon as I said it. As soon as I said it, no matter what the reason was, no matter what my emotions were, if I earnestly do it, now I'm granted kapara, and that stuff, there's no more kapara that can happen, right? It's completed. Now, if I violated a negative commandment, any negative commandment, say I lied to someone, right? A lie. I say, oh, how can I do that? How can I use the holy capacity of speech to do a lie? And I go and I apologize to the person. And then I go to God and say, I'm so sorry that I lied. I promise I will only say things that are true, which doesn't mean that you're going to be completely transparent, by the way. You don't have to, everything you think doesn't have to come out of your mouth. You still want to use seichel in what you say. But everything that I say, I should believe it is true. Everything that I say should be true as far as I know, right? Doesn't mean that I say, oh, I heard someone say this about you. And like, I don't have to spill everything that's going to hurt people's feelings. So I've apologized. Now what happens? My repentance is tentative. My tshuva tola, it hangs. So what does that mean? There's consequences to my soul of doing an avera, which we'll learn about, right? Just disruptions to my soul as it connects to God. So that, whatever that is, now it's put in a file, so to speak. It's put on hold. And then on Yom Kippur atones. And so my file builds up of these negative commandments that I've transgressed, that I apologize for. Yom Kippur comes, and now we pull out the whole file. And, there's this book, and I'm like, okay, let's this one and check out this one, however you want to picture it. It can be a Google file, it can be it's the trash, yeah, exactly. So Yom Kippur comes and you go through the whole file for the year, right? All the stuff that I came to God, I said the Amida, I said, I'm sorry for everything I've done. I thought about it, I meant it, right? But now somehow it's on hold, and Yom Kippur does something additional that finally finishes the kapara, the cleansing. So I got to wait. So based on that, let me ask you, which is more severe? Missing out on a positive commandment or transgressing a negative commandment?
Negative.
Clearly, right? Negative. Why?
Because you're not forgiven until we don't.
All right, it takes longer, right? So clearly a positive commandment, boom, that day, kapara happens. A negative commandment, now, my gosh, imagine you do it the week after Yom Kippur. Now you got to wait a whole year. It's hanging over my head, this thing. It must be more severe, right? Now, actually, we'll see that there's another instance where it's the opposite, and then we have a problem. And by resolving this problem, we're going to understand deeply what the effects are of both the negative and positive commandment and how they both affect our relationship with God. Okay? You can't be confused because we haven't gone there yet.
No, I'm not confused.
Okay. You're leaning back like,
That's the question.
what's the question?
No.
Oh, okay.
Let's go.
Okay, so here goes. Perush,
Doesn't it depend on the negative commandment, the severity of the negative commandment?
Yeah, but I mean generally as a category. It's true. It may be, even if it's true, which it is not.
Violate
Yeah.
wool and linen is not as severe as violating do not kill,
Oh,
correct?
I don't want to go there.
I don't think you can do that.
Yes.
Negative is negative, period.
You pick tricky ones, right? Because you pick two that are biblical. So I don't want to say that like a strictly biblical commandment that you can say, oh, it's less severe because it's less important to me. Like, But let's say the question is, obviously, you know what, that'll get us down a rabbit hole. As a category, it seems like the negative is more severe than positive. That's clear.
So the devil in me says, I'll wait till the day before Yom Kippur, do all the
Well,
negatives.
commandments.
Well,
And then I don't have to wait.
I mean, he gets into that someone that specifically says that says, oh, because tshuva is available, now that's gonna cause me to sin, and then I'll repent. That's a special category where tshuva becomes even harder. It's a different category. So we all, we thought that through already. But nothing stands in front of tshuva ultimately. Perush defalgav deal inyan kiyum mitzvah aseh gdola shedocha et lo taseh. Stuart, why don't you go ahead?
This means
183?
Oh yeah, 183, 180 at the bottom. This means. And you can each read one.
Oh, this means? Okay. Oh, me? Oh, this means that though in terms of fulfillment, a positive commandment is superior, for which reason it supersedes a prohibitive commandment.
And go on
Okay,
this
that's like a
superiority.
double negative to me, and my brain just went into spin cycle.
I do 183 too. This is so.
Okay, this superiority of a positive commandment, of a positive command that makes it supersede a negative command is so because by performing a positive command, one precipitates an illumination and flow into the higher worlds from the reflected infinite Ein Sof light. Ein Sof is like the highest light, isn't it?
Ein Sof means without end, means infinite.
Huh?
Ein Sof means infinite. Sof is
Oh.
end and Ein is without.
As we find in the Zohar, the 248 positive commandments are the 248 organs of the king.
Okay, so here, now the Alter Rebbe is pointing out an issue, which is, hold on, we know that in terms of kiyum, in terms of doing things day to day, if I have a negative commandment and a positive commandment that conflict, which one wins out? Not the negative commandment, the positive commandment, right? An example is tzitzit, right? Originally there was tchelet, there was a blue strand that had to be wool and it was attached to a linen garment. And you just brought up, did you read it in advance? You talked about shatnez? Literally, like that's exactly the best example, right? So you're not allowed to mix wool and linen in a garment, but if you're commanded to do tcheles, which we don't do anymore, some people do, I don't. Now you're specifically mixing wool with linen because a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. Another example is if you have Saharat, you have like this strange whitish sort of blemish thing that was happening. You're supposed to guard it. You have to make sure that it doesn't, you can't pluck it off or take it off because a Kohen has to look at it. This is biblical. But if you happen to have it on your organ of the covenant, we know what that means. And it's the day to do the circumcision. Now you're not allowed to cut off the tsaras that's there, but you're actually mandated to do the circumcision. So the circumcision overrides the prohibition against cutting off tsarat. Make sense? So now we have a problem because in real time, a positive commandment actually overrides a negative commandment. So how can it be that a negative commandment is more severe, holds more weight? On the other hand, the negative commandment, you have to wait till Yom Kippur for atonement. So that must mean that it's more severe. So which one is more important? It seems like we have a contradiction. In fact, we don't once we understand the reasoning behind it. And the reasoning behind it has to do with what he just said. So let me review again. So you can go to your page. So this is positive and negative commandments we're looking at, and what their weight is and how they work in terms of kapara, in terms of this wiping away, this cleansing. So positive and negative commandments. First thing we learned, a positive commandment is forgiven right away, as soon as asked for forgiveness. Negative, it's put on hold, and on Yom Kippur, I get the kapara, the cleansing. right? So that's point one. Point two, in doing the commandments, it seems like it's the opposite. A positive commandment will supersede a negative commandment, whereas a negative commandment will be set aside, right? We put on hold when a positive commandment conflicts with it. And then three, the effect of a positive commandment that he just said is that it draws light down, right? He says, by performing a positive commandment, one precipitates an illumination and flow into the higher worlds from the reflected infinite Ein Sof light. So what is the effect of a positive commandment? I'm actually taking light that wouldn't be in the world, this something coming from God, from the Ein Sof, and is now coming into the world. And because it was me doing the mitzvah, no one else in the universe ever, anywhere, could ever draw that light down. Now, one step further, if it has to do with something I could do that day, if I was saying the Shema this morning, which reminds me, we should blow the shofar before we're done. So don't go out before I blow the shofar. I won't do it online because we lose all our viewers when I blow the shofar. I guess because you should do it in person. But if it's something I should do today, now there's light that's possible to bring into the world just with my actions, just by saying the Shema, and just today. And that packet of light is there and I can draw it down. And does anyone else have access to that light ever before, ever again? No? Can I access that light by doing another mitzvah? I can't. Because the light for the Shema is different than the light for tzedakah. Yeah. I mean, I can give $1,000 of tzedakah that day. It's still not going to draw down the light of the Shema, because that's God saying, Smolash is saying the Shema. I love that light, right? I also love when Smolash gives tzedakah, but that's not the same as the Shema. I've got light for both, right? God has light for everything, right? So the specific light that I could draw in that day, me, for the Shema, that's not going to come in because I do a different mitzvah, right? I know they contain everything, but still, the light for the Shema, that's a particular light, right? Here's another question. Can I ever draw that light down again another time?
Next time you do the Shema the next day?
Okay, I do the Shema the next day. That's a different day. So I have a light for that day for the Shema, but my light for today for the Shema, it's connected to this time, and this time is unique, right? This is a specific moment where the world needs a unique contribution from me that has to do with today and the relationships today and what's going on. Everything is so beyond my ability to understand. But I know because I'm supposed to say the Shema today, that means the world needs a light from me today for the Shema. So if I don't bring it down, if I don't say it, A, no one else can bring it in for me. It's going to be lacking. B, I can't bring it in because I did another mitzvah. It's going to be lacking. And C, I can't bring it in the future because it's going to be lacking. And also, I couldn't have brought it in the past. I couldn't have yesterday said the Shema twice, and that counts for today, right? So it's such a precious light, and it's so unique. And the moment it's gone, and nothing can bring it back. Nothing can bring it back. Whereas on the negative side, what do I do when I do a negative error? It's not that there's a light that should have come in. It's that I'm disrupting something in my soul, and that's disrupting something in the source of my soul, which is, as we learn, the Hey of God's name. So we can call it a blemish, a disruption, whatever word you want to use, right? A tear. So it's a very different dynamic to do a negative commandment if I eat on Yom Kippur, not because I was ill, just because I was hungry. If I eat bread on Passover, this creates a disruption in my soul and in the source of my soul. But there wasn't any light that's missing. It's just that something needs repair. Something needs repair. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So going on. Stop share.
What else would bring light down besides the Shema?
Any mitzvah, any Torah learning.
Any mitzvah?
Yeah. So I drank this coffee. I did a blessing. I'm hopefully using it now to teach Torah so we all connect with God. So that's a mitzvah of eating food with a blessing, and that's good. Right now we're learning Torah, so that's a mitzvah. That's bringing in light. If I don't forget, we'll blow the shofar. That's a nice minhag. Connect to Elul. That'll bring down light. if we express love to another Jew, that's a mitzvah that brings down light. So all day long, we're doing mitzvahs to bring it down light. It jives is what we learned in the Tanya, right? It's the same thing in the previous.
It's all this, it's different degrees of light, or is it all the same kind of light?
Yeah, it's different degrees of light, but any amount of infinite light works for me.
Right.
And now he's gonna really deepen the metaphor here. As it says, Moshe katav b'Zohar deramach pikudin inun ramach evarin demalka. The 248 positive commandments from the Zohar are the 248 organs of the king. So when we think of the positive commandments of bringing light, this is actually God's, so to speak, body. It's obviously a conceptual body, but God to come down here, to have a home here, the entirety of God's body, so to speak, needs to have all the commandments here. And each one of them is an organ in the commandments. And we together doing those mitzvahs, that solidifies, so to speak, God's place down here, God's home in the lowest place. And each one of them is needed, right? If I need to take a supplement to help my liver, it's not necessarily going to help if I take something that will help with my eyes, right? The liver needs the liver things, right? That's so medical. So same thing with the mitzvahs. If I don't say the Shema, that's one of God's organs, so to speak. And the fact that I do another mitzvah, I can go into the sukkah all day long afterwards. But if I didn't say the Shema, that particular organ, it's not got its energy for the day. It doesn't have that light. V'gam al nafsho helokit. And also, Linda, you want to read for a little on the page?
I'm in Saugatuck and I don't have a good signal, so I'm going to skip reading today.
Okay, let's go back to Dan.
And also through the performance of a positive command, one draws godliness onto his divine soul.
Right. So we learned this, that it's not just that I draw into the world, I draw it literally onto my own divine soul. So if you want godly light on your divine soul, go do a mitzvah, as we learned. Like, it's a beautiful thing. It comes into the world and it comes onto my soul. And we often rattle off the blessing for a commandment, but there's something we learned already, very profound about it. Go ahead, Eleanor.
As we say in the blessings that precede the performance of many mitzvot, we have hallowed us, he who has hallowed us with his commandments.
Right. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, right? So we teach the kids, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav. And we learn it as a childish thing, and we sometimes think, oh, this is just that childish thing I say before a blessing and teach my kids. It's so profound. It's so profound. Kedushin has to do with a marriage, the holiness of a marriage. Every time I say a blessing, I'm seeing God's face directly. I'm saying God is now doing Kiddushin with me. God is, so to speak, marrying me. And my soul is being connected to God in the most profound way. And that light is coming onto my soul. And I might just rattle it off. Okay, got to say hamotzi, boom, we're done, right? Or whatever. I might not be aware of it, but my soul is aware, and I can become conscious of it, that every time I say one of those blessings, I'm marrying God again. It could be the most profound thing. And so that's these positive commandments. These positive commandments are drawing light into the world, drawing light onto our soul. Aval inyan tshuva. Go ahead, Rick.
Concerning repentance,
And we'll do one more. Af shemochalin lo haonesh al hamarad b'malchuto yiparek v'lo asa mamar hamelech.
concerning repentance, which would seek to rectify the transgression of the positive command.
Though through repentance.
Through repentance, the punishment for rebelling against God's rule and not fulfilling the king's word is commuted.
Right. So for a negative commandment, yeah, I did a negative commandment that made a blemish. God has no problem washing away a blemish. God has no problem forgiving, and then it's gone, right? If I have this beautiful shofar and I spill some, you name it on it, I spill some wax on it. Oh, there's wax on my shofar. It doesn't look nice. I clean it off. It's gone. Does anyone know there was ever wax on the shofar? You can't tell. It's exactly the same shofar as before. It's done. There's nothing else, right? It's done. if I, yeah, so that's I lost my, oh, sorry. We're explaining the opposite, right? We know that a negative commandment, so just erase what I said, as beautiful as it was, never mind the wax on the shofar. So that was confusing myself. Concerning repentance, which will seek to rectify the transgression of a positive command. So yes, a negative commandment, where I've made a blemish in something, that is, I wait until Yom Kippur until it's actually erased, all right? When I miss a positive commandment, although the punishment for rebelling against God by not doing what God wanted is commuted, which means I'm forgiven right there, right? I said, I'm sorry that I forgot to do this, and kapara is granted. Nevertheless, mikol makom haor nedar v'chulu, nevertheless, the illumination is lacking. The illumination is lacking. So now let's look at this question again about which is more severe, right? The fact that a negative commandment has to wait until Yom Kippur has to do not with that it's more severe, but with that it is something that actually can be corrected. It is something that actually can be fixed. And so because it can be fixed, say, okay, there's something we can do here, sit down, it's going to be a process. You know, you start by first, of course, apologizing. Okay, now it's in the file, but you know, it gets complicated. There's your soul, and your soul, how it connects to God's name. You've dealt with God's name here. You made a little blemish. So we're going to put it in a file. And on the day when something special happens and we can actually correct these things, we're going to pull it back, and kapara is going to happen as long as you go through and pray properly, right? Now imagine something that's beyond that. Imagine something that there's just no way you can possibly correct it, right? Which is that light. I can't, on Yom Kippur, I can't bring that light back in. Right? When I pray on Yom Kippur and say, I'm sorry that I missed this, I didn't do that, I didn't learn Torah this time, and I didn't say the Shema, all those times that I missed, God's like, yeah, I forgave you for that. That's already done. But what are we going to do now? You're going to go back in time and bring that light in? That light's still up here. It never came down, right? Can't be fixed, can't come back. It's missed, it's gone. It's an or neder, it's a missing light, right? So that now there's no process, right? I mean, you know, if you like something's done, right? If right, God forbid, I have a pet, and the pet gets into an accident, and the pet is wounded, right? And I bring it to a doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh yeah, you know, this is not so bad an injury. We can treat it. Here's a form, down this, it's come back 3 times. There's a whole process. If it's much worse, if the vet looks at the animal and says, "There's nothing we can do. Just, you know, we're going to make it comfortable, and you know, there's nothing medically to be done." That's much worse, but there's no process. It's done, right? There's nothing further. So the fact that there's a process that takes longer does not mean that it's more severe. In fact, in this case, it means there's something you can do. It's still reparable, it's still repairable. You can still fix it. So now let's go back to the question of a positive and negative commandment, right? A positive commandment supersedes a negative commandment in action, because actually that's the whole point, is bringing light down. And when it comes to the two, whether, you know, I'm so bad, I did it at Avera, poor me, I'm such a bad Jew, right? Compared to like, I'm going to connect with God, I'm going to be married to God, I'm going to bring the light on me. There's no conversation about which is more important. Of course, you're here to bring light down. You're going to mess up. You think you're not going to mess up? You think you're here to be perfect? You think God created you to be perfect? Averas are going to happen. Every one of us does Averas. Every person you know does Averas. There's a way to deal with Averas, but that's not the point of why we're here. The point of why we're here is because God wants mitzvahs to happen, to make a home here, right? So that is the highest thing. That's why it displaces a negative commandment. And why does the negative commandment have to wait till Yom Kippur? Because there's something you can still do. It's not as severe as leaving out a positive commandment, where there the light is missing forever, for good, right? For good. Light, God thought, I need to make a Smolash, because that soul has to come down for this particular light at this time and do this mitzvah, and it's going to be so great. That's why I made the world. And I'm like, nah, today I'm gonna stay on Facebook today. I'm gonna miss it.
That's why with Sadiq, it has all this light coming down all the time.
Of course, yeah, it's Sadiq, but us too. Us too. We don't underestimate us, right?
Okay.
For when we do a tzaddik is going to run to do it. It's automatic, and they bring great light down. They change the world, yeah, but it's not a struggle for them, right? So when we do it with struggle,
And that's what you said when you meet with Sadi, they have this glow about them, right?
yeah,
I think you brought that up.
that's because they've transformed themselves.
With
yeah,
all the
yeah.
light that's coming down.
Yeah, but it's not productive for me to think, well, my mitzvahs are less important than the tzaddiks, right? It's not necessarily true either. So that actually explains the entire contradiction and resolves the contradiction, right? Both of these phenomena, the fact that a negative commandment has to wait till Yom Kippur, and the fact that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment in activity is all the same point, which is that a positive commandment is more important than a negative commandment. And the same thing applies to us in life. To us in life, like I said, we can get caught up in thinking, oh, I've messed up. I'm a terrible person. I'll never get it right. And that's it's not true. It's just guilt, and it's not useful. And B, welcome to life, right? All of us mess up. We're not here to be perfect. And that is not the best Jewish way. It's certainly not what the Alter Rebbe teaches. Yes, I messed up. Okay, fine. Let's take care of it. There's a way to do tshuva. But focusing on the positive, there was a big Rebbe that once people asked him like what kind of Hasidim he intended to have, and he'd become Rebbe recently. And he said, they said, do you want to have the kind of Hasidim that that never do an Avera, or that, they asked him some question. He said, no. I want Hasidim that are so busy doing positive commandments that they don't even have time to do a negative commandment. That's what he said. And that should be us. That should be us. That when I do a positive commandment, I recognize that I'm actually marrying God. I'm bringing God down here, and a little bit of that light can get rid of a tremendous amount of darkness, When we focus on that, that should be our focus also on Yom Kippur. That it's not just about, oh, I did this negative and this negative, and how will I get it off my record? But rather it's, I'm gonna reset my bar so that all the commandments that I said I would do, I do to them. I'm gonna add to it, because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to bring down light. I'm here to make meaning in the world and share that with other people. Yeah.
It just hit me. I bought a few years ago, I bought one of those sweatshirts from Shul.
Yeah.
Said a little bit of light removes a lot of darkness. I thought that was in terms of, I've always thought of that in terms of darkness of the world, not so much what you just said, that doing a lot of mitzvahs can prevent you from doing bad things. So me, myself, not just the world around me.
Yeah, so there's an important concept to learn from this, Stuart, which is that everything in the physical is flowing out of the same phenomenon in the spiritual. So anything you notice in the world, like, oh, isn't that interesting that I can walk into a 1,000 square foot room that's completely pitch black. I can light up one tiny match, and suddenly the entire room is now a little bit visible. Like I've displaced all this darkness with one tiny match. Right. So when I notice that about the physical, that should tell me that the same thing is always true in the spiritual. That the same thing is always true in the spiritual, and even more so. So that phenomenon is there to show us that on the spiritual side, I can focus on the darkness and the failures and the mistakes. And maybe that'll get me somewhere. Maybe I'll really control myself, and I'll be punished if I do this, and I'm bringing negativity, and I make sure, and I'm afraid to cross any line. Maybe you can get yourself to function that way, but you're not probably going to be very happy, right? Whereas recognizing the depth of what I'm accomplishing when I do a positive mitzvah, and getting myself excited and starting to recognize the light that I bring to the world, now suddenly, I think I'm going to do less negative commandments anyways, because I'm so excited about the positive. B, I'm going to enjoy doing them, so I'm going to infuse them with the soul that we want for them to elevate. And C, I'll inspire other people, because if you see somebody that's happy and excited doing something, you're kind of curious what's going on there. I want to get in that party, right? See somebody that's just, set and is, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to fight against this negativity. you feel like that person's, I don't know, I don't know if I want to drink that lemonade. You know what I mean? So focusing on the positive spiritually, that is exactly that same phenomenon, that physical light banishes physical darkness, and spiritual light, even more so, banishes any amount of spiritual darkness.
Wow.
So that should be, so let's review before I finish. There was one more point I wanted to get to. We'll visit that. We'll visit that next week. Two big things in these chapters. So we'll do one more class on chapters 1 to 3. I thought I could get it all in one day, but there you go. So definitions for our whole book, right? Tshuva, we're defining again how. You can say it online. Returning to what now? Returning to
God.
God, returning to God, returning to me being a piece of God, returning to understanding who I am, returning to all that stuff. Kapara from Yom Kippur means what? Cleansing, washing.
Cleanse.
Right? So when I apologize, and the same thing is true of a relationship, right? I did something really hurtful to my wife, God forbid. Oh, I'm so terrible. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. She says, okay, I accept your apology. But are things really the same? Right? Things aren't quite the same until something else happens, which is forgiveness, and it's washed away. And then it's gone. And then, in fact, we get to a place, as we'll see, where I have a deeper connection with my wife than I would have, strangely, had I not done the negative thing. Yeah. And that is the ultimate, by the way, that is the ultimate reason why we focus on the positive, because even, as we'll see, even the negative commandments, yeah, when I did them, they were negative. But now that I've actually atoned for them and gone through kapara, now I'm not just back to where I was before, I'm back to a deeper connection with God, a higher connection with God. So in the end, even the negative stuff, in the end, we want to focus on the positive side of it, that all that stuff, there's an image the author ever brings that when you tear a rope, right, that connects two things, and then you tie it back together, now the knot, it's got two ropes on the knot, so the knot where it was torn is stronger than the rest of the rope. Stronger than the rest of the rope, and we'll go deeper into it. But it's the same thing here. When I truly apologize and truly go through wiping it away so it's not there anymore, I'm not back to where I was before, I'm back to a higher place. And then in hindsight, and only in hindsight, that negative functioned as a positive as well. So in the end, it's all positive. But of course, we can't do that for the future. We can't say, well, now I get to do Averas because in the end, they're going to bring me closer to God once I do tshuva. It's only having to do with the past. And obviously only having to do with myself that I do that. Right, we're going to finish up here. We'll complete chapters 1 to 3 next time. Wish everybody a wonderful Rosh Hashanah. Before we go, let's blow the shofar. I'll be off camera. And stand if you're comfortable. So I turned the mic volume down halfway through there. So if it was blasting your speakers, I apologize at the beginning. I wish everybody, you should have a very successful Rosh Hashanah. You know that this is where we're building amazing things for the coming year and returning to our souls. So hope you have a sweet, sweet new year, and we'll see you next class.